Hey, thanks again for joining. I really appreciate it. This is Matt Javitt with Passport Joy Travel Talk. And today what we're going to do is take a break from some of the conversations I've been having with friends around the world during this crisis and share an interview that I had recently with Cathleen Merkel. She has a podcast called the Legendary Leaders Podcast, and we had such an awesome, fun conversation that I wanted to share it with you. Her podcast aims to inspire her audience to take charge and create fulfilling careers and personal lives without the need to sacrifice their hard-earned success. And we talk about a wide range of topics in this conversation, from our travel and then a lot of some things that are actually going on today in the world and how that might relate back to things that you might be going through. So again, I really recommend it. I'll have links to her podcast in the show notes. Again, Cathleen Merkel with the Legendary Leaders Podcast. And I think you're going to enjoy it. It was a good conversation, a good talk. As always, feel free to find us at passportjoy.com. That's where all the links are to all the different side projects we've done with travel along the way. With the highlight right now being the World Barbershop Adventures that's available on Amazon Prime. Check that out. And as we get closer to Police Appreciation Day, please consider the book, my self-published photography book, Police, Brotherhood, and Uniform Around the World, that showcases officers around the world that we encountered during long walks and I took photographs of. When we came back, I created a book. So look for that at policearoundtheworld.com, as Police Appreciation Day is in mid-May. Might be something you get a police officer in your neighborhood or whatnot. Okay? Again, hopefully you enjoy this conversation. Would love your feedback. Check out Cathleen Merkel. Add her to your podcast list because she has got some great podcast guests. And enjoy.
So hello and welcome. Today I have Matt Javitt here with me. Hello, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you dialing in here from Indianapolis. But obviously you are someone who I am so curious to learn more about because you have been traveling for 2 years. I mean, who can say that about himself? Which is a great experience. Yeah. I'm highly jealous. So it would be fantastic to know, Matt, how you got to the stage where you and your wife decided, you know what, let's go. We have safe jobs. We are successful in what we are doing, but it's time to leave and have a break.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my near-term career, I was a technology sales executive for a large international consulting company. They're a French-based company, but I worked out of the office here in Indiana. And through those 9 years, I worked with them. The first couple were horrible, just like any sales job. I was transitioning from a different industry, and I was just learning the sales role there, corporate to corporate sales. I was brand new to technology. So those first 2 years were brutal, and I had to put in a ton of hours just to catch up and get ahead. And then there was a point where I hit a good flow, and I got lucky a few times, and I started building a great portfolio. And then towards the last 5 years of my career with that company, I won sales incentive awards for the year prior. Wow. Which is a part of my story because those 5 years working for that international company, they took us on amazing places. So they would take 40 of their top sales executives from around the world, and we went to places like Istanbul, Turkey, Chiang Mai, Thailand, Goa, India, Cape Town, South Africa. And then 1 year they came to Miami. And through those amazing journeys with my wife, we would go and we would spend a little bit more time than the 3 or 4 days that the company allocated for the celebration. And we would just experience these places. And I had never had the opportunity to travel internationally until that phase of my life. So I grew up as a military kid. We traveled all over the country. I've lived in 10 states in America. I went to 3 high schools. I played college basketball, but I jumped around a little bit. So I went to a bunch of colleges. But through that process, I was only really in America. I had a chance to go to Bahamas. I'd go to Mexico a couple of times, but I never got a chance to really experience different cultures. And we were in that first trip in Istanbul, Turkey. And I can just remember sitting in traffic, back-to-back traffic. Istanbul is so crazy. If you've ever been there, 14 million people on the border of Europe and Asia. And we're just sitting in traffic, and my mind was blown. I've never experienced anything like that. And then just like walking through the markets, and Nikki and I, we stopped at a cafe, and we just sat and people watched. And at that point, there was something inside me that said, I've got to do more of this. So we started building in where we would typically go to like Las Vegas or down to Florida. We started building trips in to go to Croatia, Greece, Brazil, Argentina. So over those years, we wanted to experience more of the world. And every time we'd fly home, we would just be longing for more. We just wished that we could have just spent a little bit more time there. And I would always be in the back of the the magazine at the back of the seat of the airplane. I would just be looking at all the different places around the world and just dreaming. So we started setting goals. I mean, Nikki and I are real big goal setters. And as a couple, we set financial goals, we set personal goals together. And it was at a point where it seemed impossible. Nikki's got her doctorate degree, so we were still working on that student debt. We're still working on paying down the house. It seemed impossible, but we wrote down the goal to travel the world full time. And over those next few years, we just kept working our tail off. We got a lot of breaks in our career financially, and then we just kept after it. And it came to a point where, because of my age, I was just saying, hey, I'm getting a little bit older. We've got to do this sooner than later. And if we're not going to do it, we probably need to stop dreaming about it and talking about it. So we got to make it happen, or we're not making it happen. And so we had some life signs come our way that pushed us towards it. It's actually funny. We were down in Cape Town, South Africa on one of those trips. And we were out with drinks, and there was a couple there from the Netherlands, and they did the same thing. They traveled the world for 2 years. They did it much crazier than us though. They took a Land Rover and drove from the Netherlands down to Southeast Asia, and then shipped it to Vancouver and drove from Vancouver down to Chile, down to Patagonia. So we sat there for 3 hours listening to their amazing stories. And we went home to the room that night. And I told Nikki, I said, what other signs do we need? The world is telling us to go do this. Let's go do it. And then within the month, I came home and I booked our first flight. And at that point, it was still, because we were still 10 months out from actually setting away for that first trip. But at that point, it was in movement. And through those next 4 or 5 months, we booked other trips. And then once we got about 5 months out from our leave date of February 2017, we start to get everything in order. And then we set out for our trip of 27 months to 35 countries around the world.
27 months. That's just brilliant. In 35 countries. I want to hear more about the countries and your best and craziest stories. But first of all, I think the listeners would be highly interested to understand how you did it, because it sounds also fabulous, right? But you also mentioned Nikki was still paying off the student debt, for example. You were both in very, very successful roles.
Yeah.
How do you actually prepare for leaving your jobs, keeping the relationship so that you can come back and potentially have a job again, saving for the trip, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So like I said, we had to pay down that debt, and then we had to save money to make money for the trip, because the reality is with the trip is that was all money saved, and then we spent it, and now we're back into this new phase of life where we're making money again. But the process of getting to the point where we can leave, as you described, we both love our careers. We both love the companies and places that we worked for, but it was the pulling of the travel. We were running towards the travel, not running away from anything in America, which was great because it made our journey so much more impactful, because there was no negativity aligned to it. Like we've met other travelers that are so eager to get away from their homeland, and that's why they wanted to travel, where that wasn't our case at all. We just wanted to go see these and explore these other places. But as far as the preparation goes, before, it's so important. And that's the thing with some of these leaders that you're talking to. If they're looking to make career transitions or passion transitions, that process is so important, because it'll lessen the anxiety during that. And we did it all the right ways. I probably called 150 people personally before we made that trip over the 3 months before we left. And I wanted to align everything, because this company had been so good to me. They'd put me in a position as a sales executive to make the kind of money I made, to be able to save and pay off debts and do the things that we were doing. So I wanted to take care of everybody the best that I could. So that process before, as far as like documentation for my company, reaching out to all the people that worked with me, worked for me, that I reported to, letting them know that I'm doing something because it's really pulling me. It has nothing to do with this company, nothing to do with the people within the company. I love it. I love all you guys. I just have to go do this thing personally for my life. And through that process of letting people know that it was something I was trying to do. I was chasing. They understood and they became fans of our journey. And that was really important because as you transition back, because we knew that this was going to end, and we didn't know what we were going to do when we were coming back per se. So as we were coming back, it made it, and keeping those relationships aligned on our road, because with social media and all the connections we have, it's so easy just to send quick personal notes to let people know that you're thinking of them. Or if they're posting something, to let you know that you're watching their progress, just like they're watching your progress. And so we did that. We kept all those relationships aligned. And so as we transitioned back, Nikki made one phone call. We were coming home in May. Nikki made one phone call in January, and she had her job lined up as soon as we got home. I had opportunities in the market, both with my old company and other companies. I just decided to do my own thing instead of working for the corporate America big business. I wanted to start my own small business. But all those relationships that I kept along the way, those have been the people that I've leaned on as I've started my new business for advice and guidance. So I think it's real important in any transition, because we tend to get real passionate about the things we want to do. And sometimes we just think that I'm just going to go do this thing. And not that you're saying like, forget the people in my past, but you think that they're not going to be important or as important for this next phase, where all these relationships in your life, you want to keep them going because you're going to need support along the way. And you never know. That's the thing about the way that social media works today. You just never know where people are going to go in their careers, where you might be able to help them and they might be able to help you. It might be 5-10 years from now. But if you can just keep those connections, it's going to be real important, especially like when you look at like the global landscape of how work is now.
100%. And you said you came back and you knew you didn't want to go straight into or back into the corporate life. You wanted to do your own thing. What were some other realizations and learnings that you brought back with you?
I think some of the things we learned. So as we set out on this journey, we were both kind of corporate-y in nature. I worked for this big organization. Nikki worked as a clinical pharmacist in a big hospital. And as we had a chance to step away from that, and the first couple of months were very much like a vacation. We were in Chile and Peru and seeing Machu Picchu and going to the Galapagos Islands and things like that. It was very much still vacation mode. But then we hit a flow where this was our lifestyle, like this traveling, and we did it in a very budget conscious way where we would do a lot of Airbnbs, a lot of shared stays. We did some volunteering for a free exchange for bed and breakfast. We watched pets and animals in exchange for housing. So we did it in a budget conscious way, but at the same time, we had these freedoms. So it gave us a chance to work on photography. We started a podcast. We started a video series. We did these other things that are very creative in nature. And so those things really taught me about storytelling and how to tell stories. And those elements of what we were doing and the small business building that we were doing there, and how that translates back to us is it really, storytelling is so critical in sales. And as a sales executive, I would use stories from time to time to close some of the deals that I was working on with my company. But in hindsight, I probably could have did a much better job of leveraging stories to sell. And those are some of the things that I've learned in this progress. And what I'm taking into this next phase of my life is how storytelling can lead to closed business and those relationships, the relationships that we had around the world, to be able to walk into a room in Vietnam and be able to read the room quickly, to understand who you need to talk to, how you need to talk to them, and to be able to relate quickly, to build that rapport. I've been blessed because my life, as I described it, I've moved a lot and I've had to change a lot in my life. So it's helped me adapt quickly, whether it's a janitor or a CEO. I feel like I can talk to everybody in the same way. And I typically see everybody the same, because if you've had an opportunity to meet enough people in life, you know that we're all kind of the same. We all have similar goals. Some people just get different breaks in life that get them to a level where they can earn at a high level. So those things, to be able to relate with people around the globe, especially in the settings you have. Indianapolis is not a greatly diverse city, but we do have diversity. So if you meet somebody from India or the Philippines or Germany, and you can tell a story back to where you spent time in their country, and you can build that quick rapport just by that sharing of, hey, I know where you're from, and I really enjoyed my trip there. It helps so fast to build that quick relationship to then take it, whether it's a business or just trying to build a friendship with somebody. Those are the few of the things, and obviously several life lessons that came with it. But those are things that I'm really translating into the business in order to open up doors and then hopefully close business for sure.
Yeah. And there's such a richness in the diversity of cultures and people we have across the globe. I'm a massively passionate traveler, and I've done a lot of solo traveling in the past, and that has completely shaped the way I am. It has changed my personality. It has changed my view towards the world. And I come from a background that was also quite, no bluntness, quite ignorant. Quite, this is what I see. This is what I know. These are the people I experience, full stop. We don't travel a lot, and so on and so forth. I found that very, very interesting. And every culture teaches me something different. So I don't know if you can answer the question, but was there a specific culture, a crowd of people where you said, wow, they really taught me a beautiful lesson?
The Japanese were just amazing people. We spent 6 weeks from Tokyo to Osaka, Nara, and we just kind of jumped around a few cities, spent a week on an oyster farm with a family out there, sleeping on the floor and eating really close to the floor. I'm 6'6", 2 meters. So it wasn't easy to do all that. But yeah, the Japanese people, I was moved by their kindness and thoughtfulness and respect to their fellow human man. And then you look what's going on with the Olympics and stuff like that, but they were just beyond welcoming. And the respect is when you can go on a subway, a train, and there's 100 people in there, and they're all extremely quiet because they're just having the respect for each other, because some people just left work so they can sleep. It was moving. And it wasn't just the trains and it was if you needed advice on anything, because it's not easy to speak English there. Not everybody speaks English in Japan, but they did their best. They would give you anything they could to make you feel welcome. And then when we stayed with the family, just to see the warmness, because it was a multi-generational family where there was a 5-year-old daughter, the family and the grandparents were all living in this house, and just to see how they lived together, it was awesome. You hear the stories of how they, after the World Cup, they would clean up their stands, and then the World Cup team would clean up their locker room. Yeah. That we felt the same, and it's authentic. It's not like they're not doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it because that's just who they are. And you see what this, as the virus is spread, and we don't know the history of if you're watching this in 3 years, you'll know better of how this turns out. But in current day, there's not a huge outbreak in Japan. And I was telling my friends there, as all this was going on in Asia, that I can understand why it's not, because they have such respect for each other that they would not want to get somebody else sick. And so if they're saying go in self-isolation because you could potentially get somebody else sick, they own that. And so that's why they're like, okay, you're telling me to go home so I don't get, and they respect their elderly, because people are talking about the elderly in other parts of the world. The Japanese have the oldest population in the world, and we don't see any deaths. We don't see many deaths there. And I think it's because this respect for each other and the kind of the community ownership, where they would not want to feel that burden of getting somebody else sick. And that's what we just, our 6 weeks there were not long enough. And I just really enjoyed it. The food situation, my wife's a vegan, so that wasn't the easiest, but I love all the different types of food we had there. And then we got a chance to go to see sumo wrestling.
Yeah, wow.
that was quite the event. So yeah, it was awesome. I think the Japanese really stuck out.
Yeah, I fell in love with them watching the Rugby World Cup. I couldn't believe that they sing all the anthems of all the countries, that they just fight with so much, as you said, authenticity and beauty and kindness. And they have just come across absolutely beautifully. And I said to my partner, we really have to go. It's high on my list.
It is. And honestly, before we left, it probably wasn't high on my list. But then as it got closer and I was doing more and more research, I was like, man, I can't wait to get there. And then as we were there, if you walk through the streets of Tokyo, your mind is blown. And what's crazy about that is you're talking about 30 million people, but everything's really tiny. All the apartments and everything are really tiny, but you feel just safe. It was crazy to feel so safe in a city of 30 million. But it's something that everybody, if you're a traveler, Japan should definitely be high on the list.
So, Matt, before we hit the record button, you and I had a bit of chat about the current situation and coronavirus, traveling. And one thing I said to you very openly was that I see all the positive support that's happening among people at the moment here in the UK. But I do also see quite a bit of negativity, in particular people from China or Italy who have lived in London for a very long time being attacked now as foreigners who brought the illness to our country. All of these things where I say you can see some real racist behavior. So it would be great to just get some advice from your side in terms of what's the piece of advice you would give to people in terms of seeing everyone for who they are and embracing the differences that we all have.
These are going to be interesting times ahead, how people react to what we're going through, especially when it comes to travel, because with the judgments of really when it comes down to, I've been talking recently about the markets, because the wet markets are getting a lot of attention in China because they're suggesting that this is where this all started. I think it's really early in the process we know so little about this virus. How would we possibly know where it originated? I just don't understand how they're coming up with this. But they're suggesting it's coming from the wet markets there. Because you see these videos of the wet markets and they're extremely intimidating with all the different animals and how people eat in China in particular. But if anybody's ever listened to my podcast, they'll know that markets are my favorite place when we travel. We always go to the markets because it gives you a chance to understand the people the best way, because you see what they eat, you see what they're selling, you see how they interact when it comes to bartering and business. It's the quickest way to get a sense of the culture. And it's really important. And the fact that in Western country, we're so lucky to be able to go to a grocery store to pick up stuff or to have things prepackaged in a certain way. What people don't understand when you're talking about millions and billions of people, in particular when it comes to China. By the way, I've never been to China. We've spent time in Hong Kong, in Macau, but I've not spent time in mainland China. But when you're talking about some of these places with massive populations, India, for example, we spent 2.5 months in India total. There's a certain segment of their population that doesn't have access to these grocery stores or convenient food. So they rely on the rural population to raise animals, to grow vegetables and fruit, and then sell it in a marketplace. And not everybody eats the same. I know that some of the things that you see in these markets are extreme, and I probably wouldn't try them, though I've tried a lot of different food around the world. My wife laughed at me a ton. But there's people in India would judge Americans for eating as much beef as we do because they see the cow as sacred. Yeah. Does that mean we're animals because we eat that food? I don't think so. My thing is, like, we got to be careful how we judge other cultures around the world, especially if you've never been there. That's the kind of the hard part I have with some of the conversations that I've gotten into is I've talked to people, and I hate to come off as that guy like, oh, Matt, we know you've traveled, but the reality is I've had an opportunity to be in some of these places, so I understand it a little bit more than they do when they've never left this country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's hard for me to hear their judgment of these markets, and it's like, you don't even know what you're discussing here. This is just a form of their business. This is how they get their food. So those are the things that I think people just need to understand and just take a step back before you make those judgments. You don't know how these other cultures operate on a day-to-day basis, and the significant population and density in some of these places where we think a big city is 1 million or 2 million people. These cities have 15 and 20 million people in it. So that dynamic just there is so different. Yeah. And if you've never been in those cities, they're chaotic, but they're controlled. And I always tell Nikki that I'm surprised more bad news doesn't come out of these places because of how crazy their population is and how dense it is. And the fact that all these people have to operate on a day-to-day basis with this controlled, just chaotic situations. I mean, when we're in Hanoi, Vietnam, they say there's 6 million scooters in that city. One city, 6 million scooters. So it's just like the things we just can't even understand. And that's the thing that's really opened my mind is I went into the experience with a ton of questions, and I came home with a ton more questions, because the more that you experience it, the more that you understand you don't know anything. Like, we're all just so ignorant on how this whole thing, how this whole thing operates. And when you're in some of those places, you just got to just be comfortable with you don't know. And that's what a lot of people, they just want to know. They just want to have their opinion, want to know so bad. And it's one of those things like, just take a deep breath. You don't have to know.
Yeah.
It's okay to not have all the answers.
Yeah. Oh, and that's a beautiful thing to say in particular. Now, I often say to the people I work with, what's in your control? What do you know? What's important to you? And what's noise?
Yeah. Control what you can control.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you want to control it as well, is it really that important to you that you want and need to control it? Or is it something to keep yourself busy or to make you feel safe because safety is missing in another area? Whatever it is. But make sure that you focus on the things that really matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that takes us so nicely to something you said beforehand, and I saw it on your website a few times as well. You are very goal-oriented, and you mentioned Nikki and you set goals in your professional as well as in your personal life together. Yep. What's the importance behind goal setting for the two of you?
Well, for me, it's one of those things. I mean, you can relate it to travel. If you don't know where you're going, it's impossible to get there. You can start in a brand new city and you're just there and you want to see some things, but you don't know how to get there. You don't know where to take the left and take the right. There's no way you're going to get there. So by setting the goals and the foundation of what you hope to achieve on a given year, quarter, month, week, by writing those things down, it's kind of twofold. I think you tell the universe what you're trying to do. So it's like the universe is looking at your list and saying, okay, I'm going to do my best to get you there. Yeah. And then it gives you some guidelines on what you should be focusing on. Because if you don't have it, if you don't understand what you should be focusing on, then the world, especially the world we live in today, where it's just an abundance of intake, it can just pull you in so many different directions. And then you wake up at the end of the week and you're like, what did I do? I wasn't even working on the things I was supposed to be working on to get to where I'm trying to go. So if you have them written down and you have an idea of what you're trying to do week to week, month to month, then that's the guidance. And then you can build the actionable plan behind that to get you to those goals. Because it takes action. It takes a lot of action to accomplish those. But the idea of putting it down to know where you're trying to go and the things you're trying to accomplish, even if they're really big goals, if they seem impossible, at least you can backtrack to say, even if this is an impossible goal by the end of the year, if I put in these steps monthly and weekly and daily to get there, who knows? I might get there, or I might just fall a little bit short. And if I fall a little bit short, that's a whole lot closer than I am today. So that's why it's so important to use it as a guide to where we're trying to go in life. Because you just meet so many people that are in their 50s and 60s. They don't even know how they got there. They don't even know how they have the life they have, and they're miserable in their job, and they don't know. They're still doing the same thing, and they've had the same vision or dream for years, but they've never put down the goal on paper. They don't even know. They have this dream, but they don't even know how to get there. And it's like, okay, if you put it down, then you can work backwards to try to get there. So that's why they're so important to us in all aspects of our life.
Oh, I agree. And actually, I shared with a group I was working with the other week, the following example. It was about setting goals and achieving and so on. And a lot of people look at me and say, oh, goal setting, we talk about it all the time. It's not important. So how can we make it important, right? If you don't feel it's important, something's got to change about the goals, the meaning of those goals. But what I said to them was actually gave them the example of friends of mine who went traveling for a year. Yeah. And they went off, they didn't have a plan necessarily as well. They said, okay, we know our first destination and then we go with the flow. And they were really looking forward to it. And I really admired what they were doing. And when they came back, I said to them, so how was it? And they said it was just fabulous. And all the things you said, the different cultures and the learning and what you take away, and that you learn that you can live with far less and that we have so much, all of these things. But what they said was, it was at some point really challenging because we were like, where to go next? The motivation was kind of slowing down. They didn't have this bigger vision, this purpose of, okay, what do we really want to do? Traveling is nice, but what else? Yeah. Where are we going to go to? What are we going to do with these learnings?
Yeah.
Right. And
that's and what's ironic about that is I knew what we wanted to do. I had the journey set, and it wasn't set like hardcore structure,
Yeah.
but kind of like my yearly goals and quarterly goals. I knew our path. I knew what we were trying to do, and we set in some wiggle room. Just as life, you got to be ready to adjust in life. We set in time to adjust in our travels. So if we heard things, we could make it happen.
Yeah.
And we could adjust our schedule, or if we met people and they invited us into their home for a weekend, we could take them up on it. So we did things. We had a plan, and we stuck to it for the most part. And I tell you, what's crazy is even the vision that Nikki and I put together before we left for 27 months, there was a few parts that didn't happen for us, but for the most part, it came together. And it was one of those things where that's why I'm so big on goals, because if you let the universe know what you're trying to do, man, it's like there's a book that describes the traveler and how they go about their way, and that's the idea is if you have a big dream, the world will try to come together to help make that dream come true. Yeah. But you got to know, you got to have that intention, got to have that discipline and the desire to make it happen. Because if you're just wishy-washy about it, it's not going to work out that way.
Agreed. And you are a huge supporter of the power of thought.
Oh,
well,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where with goal setting, power of thought, and that's what I think it all goes together really, because if you're looking at your goal list, you know what you want to do. Those are the things you think about. And especially if you visit your list in the morning, you know what you're trying to accomplish in that day. Those are the things that are in your head that you're thinking about. And if you can, over time, you'll understand that negativity that pops in, you'll get better at creating a path where you can control those negative thoughts, and you can focus on the positive and the things that you're trying to accomplish. And so I think all those go hand in hand. And what's funny is the doubters in my life that have judged me in my way of thinking and how I go about things from time to time. Over time, if people spend enough time with you and they know how you live, over time they'll say, "Oh my God, I cannot believe that happened." And I just say, look, this is how it works. If you put these thoughts into the world and you have intent, action behind it, good things will come. And I've had it happen so many times in my life where people are like, I cannot believe that this is happening for you. And I'm just like, you've been with me. I've talked with you through this. This is what I'm trying to do. My wife in particular, she really got on board. We've been married for 14 years now. And she really understood after some time, like, okay, I guess this thing does work, especially, or if it just works for you, Matt. But she's on board. Yeah.
So one of the last questions I have for you is, what kind of advice would you give to people who may be in lockdown right now, who are not able to experience anything outside of their house right now, to bring a bit of the other world into their house, or to use their time really purposefully?
It's hard. I'm struggling as well. Quite honestly, I'm struggling as well, because all the information, you kind of want to stay up on the information, but a lot of it's redundant and a lot of it's negative too.
Yeah.
But I do like to stay informed. I don't want to be ignorant to the information that's going around me, but I do want to stay informed. But I think there's a balance there. In the world that we live in today, there's so many inputs that you got to have some output. So even if you are taking in all kinds of information to better yourself, self-improvement, books, podcasts, videos, you're doing a lot of things to give you the foundation to improve. At some point, you got to have output. You got to do something. You got to pick up the phone, make those calls for sales. You got to if you're a creative person, that's what's weird about my life is I've started to do a lot more creative stuff over the last 2 years, which is a totally different realm for me. But you got to do the actions to build things, whether it's writing every day, if it's video stuff, whatever you're doing, you got to do the action. So my thing is taking the input. There's so much great advice. We're in the best time in the world to get all this information that before wasn't readily available, unless you went through the library and you had the right book. But you got to be careful, because it can be too much inputs. And then you just wake up at the end of the week saying, well, what did I really do for my life, rather than just listen to other people tell me how to live my life? Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm on the same page. I have at the moment a very strict schedule in terms of information. I'm the same as you are. I want to be informed. So I have a morning
Yeah.
check-in and I watch any updates on the situation in the late afternoon, evening. That is it. And everything else. And I had a chat with my other half beforehand, who was also struggling in terms of what am I going to do? And I said, what are all the things you wanted to do for a long time? You didn't get to it, right?
So true.
And we went through this, and it included podcast, included reading, but it also included some creative business work. Now is the time, make use of it, because once we get back into the busy hassle and have the to-do list is super long, we are not going to get to it.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful.
And you got to realize it's so true. And you've got to realize that, and this is like a self-check for some people. If we're in this isolation for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it might end up being, and you don't do that thing that you've been telling yourself you're going to do forever, you should just take it off the list.
Yes.
Because it just means it's not important to you. And so if you can look at yourself in 2 months and it's June or July, and you look back on your life and you're like, man, I didn't do that thing, and you have that regret, then you should start to do it now. I was in that phase. So I had a screenplay in my brain for like 4 years, never did anything. And then we're on our trip, and we had all this. What's funny is like we had all this extra time to do stuff, but then people are like, dude, you did a podcast weekly from around the world. You started a YouTube series that ended up being on Amazon Prime. You did a self-published book. Like I was doing all these different projects. And I wrote a screenplay. I wrote a 120-page screenplay that I've been trying to push out into Hollywood and probably never get made. But I did it for the only reason that it was in my head. I kept talking about it. And I was like, Matt, if you don't do it on this trip, you will never do it. Mm-hmm. So either stop thinking about it or just do it. Yeah. And so then I figured out how to write a screenplay, and I did it. And that's my encouragement to people, because if you have all these fake dreams, you're not helping yourself. And it's really a burden onto your brain, because if you have a dream you're not accomplishing, and you're not even setting out to do it, your brain knows, you know that. So that's a failure in your head, because you're not taking that risk. And that's not a positive thing. If you're not taking that leap of faith and you just keep telling yourself, oh, in a month, oh, in 3 months, it's not good for your psyche at all. No. So either just erase it from your list, or start to take small action to make it happen. Because you just don't want those negative thoughts, because you're just fooling yourself, and you're smarter than that. Like, you're fooling yourself. So that'd be my advice. If you get through this phase here and you haven't done what you've been telling yourself to do, stop acting like you're going to do it, because you're not.
Yeah.
And, because after this phase, we're back in motion. And I would really encourage people now to, in a very authentic way, keep those relationships going. Whether you reach out to somebody 6 months, you have to even talk to them in 6 or 12 months, send them a nice note, thinking about you. Hope everything's going well, because no matter where you are in your career, we're going to need people. We're really going to need people. I'm real big on relationships, because those are the people that are going to get you those jobs in the future, or you're going to need them as part of your business. Whatever your business is, you don't know how you might need those folks. So just send out a few, just make it a quick note every day. And it'll make you feel better as well, and part of that process for sure.
And if I may add to what you just said, also take the time to step back, to reflect on your life as it is right now. Is it the way you want it to progress after Corona? Is that, is the way you are and how you lead yourself at the moment exactly how you want to be going forward? So what you so nicely did during your trip is you kept yourself very active from the sounds of it, yeah. But you also seem to have time to reflect, to think about things, and then to start some important projects that you started that are now running very successfully. So sometimes it takes a different perspective. Use this time to build this different perspective.
Absolutely. People are going to learn a lot about themselves in this process. And it's because Nikki and I traveled together for 27 straight months, 24/7 together. I mean, that was our life. And we had peaks and valleys. Like, we spent 3 months in South Africa. Like I said, 2.5 months in India. We spent a month in Bali. So we had places where we had a chance to slow down and get a rhythm, because that was the biggest thing we missed on the road, is a rhythm. We really didn't have a great rhythm, but we would have parts of that. But we got used to just hanging together. And that's what's, and especially some people in our phase of life, it's very uncommon for a married couple to be able to spend that much time together. It usually happens in retirement, but for us, it was in the middle of our careers. But now, as we talk to people going through this isolation, and then the comments we hear, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, a lot about your partner, a lot about how you live, because you just get some people that are just crawling out of their skin, the guy out of the house.
Yeah.
And Nikki and I are like, we did this for 2 years. This is nothing. And so it's one of those things that, do a lot of self-talk, understand where you're at. And even relationships, maybe the relationship, because now you're spending a lot of time together, maybe it's not the right one to be in. So it's one of those things where this period, Nikki and I were so blessed to be able to do that for the time that we did and reflect like you're describing and understand you just don't need much, especially when you meet a lot of people around the world that just have very little and they're way happier than the people that you know back home. You don't need much. And I think this is one of those things where we'll realize that some of the materialism is out of control, and what you put importance on, I think that we'll come out of this thing understanding what things we should value more than others, for sure.
Agreed. What a beautiful message to finish this podcast with. It has been so amazing to have you on the show. But before I let you go, we want to know, where can people find you? Where can people find the podcast and your Amazon Prime show and so on?
Yeah. So the best place to find me is at passportjoy.com. passportjoy.com. That has all the information there of everything that Nikki and I are working on. But the main thing that I'm so excited about now is World Barbershop Adventures. That is me in barber chairs around the world. It's on Amazon Prime in the UK and America. It's coming to Amazon Prime in Germany real soon, and Japan as well. So that's the main thing that I'm excited about. Just continue to get the word out there that there's not many things more intimate than letting another man put a razor and a blade on your neck in a foreign country. So I said, I'm proud of the idea of just sharing that, how amazing travel can be, and just how awesome people are around the world, and just opening your eyes to see different lands, especially once we get out of this. Hopefully people will look at the world a little bit differently and know that we're all kind of the same. We're all trying to do the same thing. And we're all trying to achieve similar goals. So that's all I'm trying to share through that series.
Beautiful. And please don't stop traveling. I mean, yes, at the moment we have to. So please be safe. Yeah. Follow the Japanese example to look after each other. But once we got out of the worst situation, keep traveling, explore the world, and learn from everyone else across the globe. So that is my last message for all of you today.
Yes.
Amen. Thank you so much, Matt. It has been a joy to have you here in some really challenging times, but beautiful stories, lovely insights. I'm wishing you all the success in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.